everyone, welcome to my video on trade creation and trade diversion. First of all, before we talk about this graph you see on the screen, what is trade creation and what is trade diversion? Trade creation is, as the name implies, creation of trade. When a country may enter a trade agreement with another one where there's more trade involved by the abolishment or reduction of quotas and tariffs. Why would a country want to create trade? Well, maybe to lower the prices for the consumer so that they're more happy, for example. And on the other hand, we have trade diversion. Trade diversion is the opposite of trade creation. Is when we make it so that it's when the government makes it so that there is less trade happening. That can be by imposing tariffs or quotas or raising them as well. Countries mainly do this to protect their domestic industries, which we'll see here. So, first of all, let's talk about this form of trade creation, which is an abolishment of a quota here. So, if this graph looks complicated to you, we can see that it's a supply and demand diagram where we have the price and quantity of an item. PW here is the price, the world price of the item, how much it would the price of an imported item, an imported good, and supplied SW is a supply world of that good. And P star and Q star here are the price and quantity of that good in the country itself. So when a country imposes a quota, obviously, um, the price is raised because there's a limited amount of that good which can come in the country. So after this line here, the domestic supply has to shift outwards. So now what happens when there's trade creation here? The trade creation is the abolishment of the quota, which means that the domestic supply goes back to where it should be, and the price plus quota decreases to PW, which makes sense. So there are many effects of this. As we can see, first of all, the amount of imports rises in the country. With the quota, it would be Q1 plus Q2 minus Q1. It would be this length here. This is the amount that would be imported. And since it's cheaper now, obviously more would be imported here. So it's Q3 minus Q4. As you can see, it's much bigger here. Also, trade creation can have different effects on different groups of people, different stakeholders. So with the quota, we can see um, the the consumer surplus is the area A, B, C, D. Now, when the quota is abolished and the price decreases, the consumer benefits so much from the lower prices, as the new consumer surplus is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. Now, on the other hand, the producer is hurt by this because with the quota, since it costs more for foreign countries to sell in this country, um, the domestic producers can capitalize on this, and as you can see, they have a producer surplus when the quota is active of J plus E, and then obviously when it's abolished, they only get J here. And the most interesting thing about this quota is that when there is a quota, these sections here, F, G, H, I, this huge area, as you can see, is nothing. It's a deadweight loss. And it means the money is just lost over here. However, when the quota is abolished, this whole area goes to the consumers. So in the end, the trade creation creates a net benefit for the country. Even though the producers are losing out, the consumers are gaining so much more, and the deadweight loss is completely annulled. You can see the same thing with the tariffs here. The tariff diagram is a bit simpler. As you can see, it's just an increase in price here with a tariff because they have to pay a tax on imported goods. And it's pretty much the same thing here. The amount which is imported increases after the abolishment of the tariffs, and the consumer surplus benefits, again taking area E from the producer, and the producer surplus loses E, obviously. Um, However, what's different is that in a tariff you have the government revenue, G and H, and this G and H mean that because since there's a tax on the good, the government gains some money here. But there's also a deadweight loss, F and I. So when the tariff is abolished, we can see that the consumer gains the zones F, G, H, and I, which means it does gain the initial government revenue, but it also gains the deadweight loss from the tariff because there's still a deadweight loss in the tariff, smaller than in a quota, sure, but it still exists, which means when you abolish a tariff, there is still a net benefit for the country because um, the zones F and I are gained by the consumers. And trade diversion is basically the opposite here. So, um, let's say a country joins a customs union, and let's say it's the UK, and they join a customs union with America, the United States of America. They have to impose a tariff on France. So, for wine, for example, so they'll put a tariff here for France, this line here, and they'll put a tax, and this would be the price with the tariff. And as soon as this is implemented, the government gains the revenue, and there's a deadweight loss. The amount of imports gets smaller, and the domestic wine producers do benefit from this because it gains zone E. So it's basically the exact opposite of trade creation. Same thing with the quotas here. Um, as you can see, if we reverse this arrow and it actually becomes the domestic supply with quota, this whole section will become deadweight loss. All this and the amount of imports will reduce, the consumer surplus will become lower, and the producer surplus will increase. So basically, to recap, trade creation is when you reduce the amount of, well, you create more opportunities for trade in the country. There are less tariffs, less quotas, which means there are more imports. And trade diversion is the opposite. There are less imports, there are more barriers on trade, and it's usually done to protect the domestic industry here. There are plenty of examples of this in real life. For example, Vietnam. Vietnam abolished a quota on rice from other countries such as Cambodia. They used to have a quota on that, and ever since the quota was abolished, their domestic supply of rice just went down. The producers were left with no jobs, and see that's one of the problems which happens when there is trade diversion. So I hope you understand how trade diversion and trade creation works. It's a pretty simple topic, but it's something super important because it's like the base for the entire international economics.